Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of The Stitch Life. So, today we will be discussing samples everything. So, there are a lot of different types of samples. So, we're going to go over sample organization and sample types. Now, this can be if you are a brand and you can use some of these tips that we're referring to today, or if you're working, not even your brand, just all brands, but if you're doing this yourself and or if you're working with a company, a manufacturer, a product developer, it's good to know the different sample types, what their purposes are, and how you transition from one to the next. Okay. All right. So let's start with the different types of samples. So there is a reference sample, meaning it could be used for fit and or silhouette. So either one of those is fine. Then after the reference sample, there of course is a fit sample. So your fit sample, of course, is used to test out the fit of the garment and the fabrication that you need. The next one that you would have is going to be a PP sample. A PP sample stands for pre-production sample. So that is one that you take the updates or any of the changes from the fit sample and it transitions to the PP sample. Now, between the PP sample, there is a thing called like a size set sample, which means you could order samples in each size just to check the fit. And then there's also salesman samples. Now, salesman samples are supposed to be used for marketing, PR, and media. So you might want to request a lot of different salesman samples so that way you can use them. And then the size set samples is just to check the fit one more time before you go. Now, another name for salesman sample could be final sample. It could be photo shoot sample, but those are all the same things. Sales sample, photo shoot sample, final sample, those are all the same. PP is pre-production, okay? Now, the one thing about a pre-production sample is that means that you've already approved the fit sample. So if they start with the pre-production sample, more than likely the fabrics are already cut, and they're just confirming that from the sample making stage, it has transitioned over into the production stage. Now, let's just split those down the middle really quickly. Now, in product development, which is, of course, also part of the sampling process, that's making the fit samples and the final samples. The samples that are the most important are the reference sample, the fit sample, and the final salesman media photo shoot sample. So I'm going to show you an example of that, okay? So this right here is a reference sample. This was given to us by a client. It was her mother's, and she wanted to replicate this for her own line, but of course in a different fabrication. And then of course she wanted to change up some of the finishes and stuff like that. So this is a reference sample. So she did like the fit of this. So we use this particular reference sample for fit only, okay? Not for fabric, not for anything else, but for fit in reference to the silhouette, okay? Now, from this, we were able to create a fit sample. We could not create that fit sample without her telling us what the fabrication was going to be. So this is the fit sample. Now, the fit sample, we of course did it in a muslin. Now, ideally, what you want to do is find out what the fabrication is before you go into the fit sample, so that way you can use the same weights that you would use for the fit sample. So let's say if she was doing that in a knit, then she, of course, you might want to have wanted to use a knit fabric or something else. So that's ideally what you have to think about as well. Okay. So think about what it's going to be because, of course, fabrication always will alter fit. Now, this one then transitioned us into her now salesman sample. So she did it in a faux leather. So not as heavy as the original. The original is real leather, as you can see here. And then it has silk on the inside. Now this one is a faux leather and it has polyester. I'm sorry. Yeah, it has a polyester satin on the inside. So this one is way heavier than the one that we end up doing. Okay. But as you can see, it literally had to go from all of these different stages in order to get here. So we took a couple notes when she first tried this on. She told us, "Oh, I want my lapel a little bit smaller. I want my buttons to be further over because I really want a tight fit. I want darts added to the front. I want all of these different things." And then we took those notes and we took those notes into the fit sample, and of course we drew on the placement of the pockets and stuff like that before we end up getting to this here. And this can be used for photo shoot. It could be used for media. We could also do this in a size set if she wanted to see what it looks like in multiple different sizes. I do recommend you doing a size set if you're going to plus size. If you're just doing small, medium, large, it's pretty okay to not do a set of samples. It is costly to do samples and all of those things. And the thing about it is that those are going to be graded in order to do that. Now, ideally, I don't think it's a good idea to grade your patterns until you have actually tested the market, because you may think that your consumer is from an extra small to an extra large, but what if they're not? And then you've just now wasted more money on grading. So try to stay away from that. Now, another one, if we kind of shift over into production, now in production is where the TOP sample comes in. So a TOP sample is stands for top of production, meaning pretty much like the first one off of the sewing line. Now, the top of production sample honestly should have all the bells and whistles that you need. And this is whether you're working with a domestic or overseas manufacturer or supplier. That means it should have hang tags on it. It should have the correct care label inside, the main label, and the size label. All the other samples do not require all of this, but top of production meaning it's ready for distribution. It's ready to hit a website. It's ready to hit a store. So you're definitely going to want to have all of those things in there. So you can actually, forget about all of those different samples when in the labeling process until you get to this part of the process. Okay. Now, there's also a thing called a sew-by sample. So, for instance, if I was going to put this guy over into production, my photo shoot media sample could also serve as my sew-by sample, because typically, not in all cases, but a lot of cases, the person who makes the sample and the person that's manufacturing are not the same. So, of course, people's sewing techniques to differentiate, more changes are made after you're testing the market. So possibly they decide to maybe get rid of like the shoulder pieces, or they decide to elongate the lapel, or maybe they even try to do a different seaming. So it's a good idea to make sure that you know the differences between them, and then to have the factory recreate what the sample maker has already created. So this is like an example of that. We didn't do this one as long. We decided to shorten the jacket up just a tad bit before moving into production. And this happens all the time. You'll get to your final salesman sample, and this might be the one you're showing at Market Week, or you might be showing this on your website and in your photo shoots, but then you get feedback and then you decide to make an alteration before you put things into production. Oftentimes you'll see people post things on their website and then it may not look exactly like it when you actually get it, because they've made updates to better the product by the time it actually gets to you, the consumer. Now, if you work in the fashion world and the fashion industry, depending on where you work, the sample process will vary drastically. I've worked for a lot of different companies, and not everyone follows that exact name list. There's also a proto sample, and a proto sample could mean multiple things. It could be the reference sample, honestly, because you want to knock that particular one off. Or the proto could be the fit sample, because now you're mocking it up for the first time. So it's good to know that a lot of these terminologies honestly go hand in hand with one another. It's just good to know that there are multiple types. Now, depending on what company you work for, it's definitely going to vary, because some companies have like SRS samples, some have NDC samples, which means in distribution center. So they have samples that they want to go just to the distribution center, and they want to see what that one looks like. Whereas the salesman sample, the TOP sample, and the NDC sample are all the same, but they're going to 3 different places. The TOP sample is going to the production team to verify that everything is correct in the product development team as well as design. the salesman sample is going to the buyer and into the showroom so they can actually sell that sample. And then the NDC sample is going to the distribution center so that the warehouse knows what it looks like and where they're going to place it. Now, another one that is very much so similar as far as like name goes is like that final sample. Like I said, that final sample could also be a salesman sample as well. So depending on where it's going, it's probably going to change. The fit sample typically will go to the tech team. The tech team is the people who look at the pattern and look at the see, make sure it fits well. Now, I'll get a little bit more into that fit sample and why it's probably the most crucial sample throughout the process right after our commercial break.
Well, there's pecan turtles, pecan bear claws, pecan fudge, there's pecan toffee, there's pecan coffee, roasted pecans, pecan pesto, pecan streusel, pecan waffles, pecan pound cake, pecan
Georgia
coffee
grown
cake,
pecans,
pecan
the healthy nut for
cheesecake.
any occasion.
There's
Support
pecan
local farmers.
pancake,
Make sure the
pecan
bag
butter,
says
pecan
Georgia grown.
roll, pecan crusted trout, pecan crusted chicken.
All right, and we're back. So I want to talk a little bit about the fit samples. Now, the reason why this is probably the most important sample is because this is the nitty gritty. This is what determines what that final sample, that PP sample, that salesman sample, all of those samples would look like. So the fit sample is the most crucial thing. Now, ideally, the fit sample is the first time that the designer is seeing like what's happening with the design from that 2D version, the sketch and stuff, and now it's going into that actual 3D version. So ideally, you're a little excited, because you're now seeing like your dream kind of come to life and you're seeing what you created come to life. But you have to focus because anything that you do not approve, anything that you decide to not bring to attention is going to be affected by this. So when you're doing a fit sample, you must read it from top to bottom. Check the neckline, make sure it's fitting and sitting properly. Check the shoulders, check the armholes, check the waist, check all of that stuff. So ideally, I do think it's best that when you're going through this process, even if you are your own fit model for your brand, let somebody else try it on. There's nothing wrong with letting someone else try it on. Not to say that you're gonna let them that you're gonna follow that person's body type if you're gonna be the main one modeling, but it's always good to get a second opinion just to know how someone else feels in it. Because if you're doing this entire process by yourself, you're gonna think that everything is great and nothing's wrong. So it's something like having like that keen eye for someone else to just take a look at it. So I think that ideally you probably want to have 3 people in that room: yourself as a designer, a fitter, and a fit model. Now, if that can't be it, if you're the designer as well as the fit model, maybe we just get one more person in that room with you just to make sure, but also to catch the things maybe you don't catch. It's really hard to fit a garment from yourself if you have to do something to the back of it. Like what if the back needs to come in a lot? It's going to be really hard for you to really, really get in there and see. So I do think that this needs to be a team effort because you're not going to be the only person wearing these pieces. You're putting it out so that multiple people can wear this stuff. Okay. So let me show you another example. So this here was a jumpsuit. Now there was no reference sample for this. So this went from a sketch to an actual piece. So we used a faux leather, not too expensive, to kind of mock it up, okay? I'm gonna come a little close so I can show you a few things. So I don't know if you could tell from it sitting on the hanger, but the shoulder slope itself is pretty long, okay? And there's a lot of fabric here. Now, this one required a lot of updates, and this is the final version of it. Now, looking at them right off, I'm pretty sure you could tell there's a big difference. Of course, the belt was added to it. Also, more darts was added because the dart intake was also increased a lot more. And we put the shoulder slope back onto here. So what we did was reduce the shoulder because it was way too long. It was giving more of a drop shoulder, which means it was falling here where the shoulder point should have been here to here. So that's why you want to make sure you take your time and pay attention to even the smallest things when it comes to fit, because that is something that consumers complain the most about when shopping. And because we kind of live now in an online shopping world, the fit is super duper important to avoid returns. I think in this world, you definitely have to have a size chart on your website. And your size chart on your website has to be broken up in different things. So your knits may fit one way, your wovens may have a different fit, your denim or your bottoms or your tops might have a different fit. So if you are even a wholesaler, let's say you buy items and stuff like that, you don't really have the entire like sample process going or whatever. So if you're going that road, it's good for you to, when you, before you buy something from a vendor, test out the fit on yourself and test it out before you purchase. And that's typically what buyers do. If you're working in that buyer world, they do want to see a sample. Not everybody is producing everything from scratch, but check it, make sure that you like it, see if you can make any updates to it, or actually tell your vendor like, hey, this doesn't fit that well, this is what's wrong with it. This could be taken in a little bit, so that they know, so that they can advise their manufacturer as well. So it's very important and super duper important that you stay on top of fit and how it feels. I think that we have gotten into a world where we're just so used to clothes fitting ill will, that we don't even notice until we're actually going about our day to day, and you realize that you're pulling on your mini skirt, you're pulling down your blouse, you're shaking out your leg because you're getting a wedgie. Those are all fit issues. Fit issues can be avoided just by just going the extra mile. Ideally, let's talk about custom designers and your sample process. Now, if you're making something custom made for someone, you're going to probably want to do, I would say, 1 to 2 fittings is ideal. The first one is, of course, taking like their measurements. Now, a couple things, and I think I talked about this a little bit when I did our measurement episode, is not using the exact measurements that you have on the paper, but actually using ease. So your sample should reflect that ease. And anytime you make a sample, you need to make sure that you're using the fabric that is the closest in weight and in elasticity and ability. So let's say I'm making a, a jumpsuit, and it is a ponte. Ponte has stretch to it, but there's a lot of different types of ponte. There's heavyweight ponte, there's medium weight, there's lightweight. So you need to actually touch that fabric, feel it, understand how much ease you need to put into it. I can tell you guys a quick story. I, was overwhelmed at a point in time, and I started outsourcing and having other people help me with my fit samples and stuff like that. So I'm making the patterns, and one of the persons that did this for me, they cut the fit sample in a woven, and the garment was actually in knit. So it's like, well, they're not even going to be able to put it on because it's meant to be for a stretchy fabric. And you do need to notate that on your patterns too. Like, this is for a knit fabric, this is for a woven fabric. And it's always good to have a swatch on the fabric on the cutter's must, because that's the last thing you want to do, is be able to show up to your client and you're showing them, oh, hey, this is what I want you to try on. And it looks nothing like the fabric that they picked out, and it doesn't fit like that either. So that is probably one of the biggest concerns I love to throw out there, is make sure that the fabrication matches the pattern. Now, sampling. Once you get to the production part of it, and you say you've used, like, one of these samples is a good example, but you decide that in production, the feedback that you got is to maybe offer that particular style in denim. That's great for assortment and versus variety. Not aesthetic, but for a business model, it's assortment versus variety. So taking certain fabrications and changing them. So let's say you do this same jumpsuit over in a denim. Let's say you do maybe one in a silk. You can use the same pattern, but you're going to need to get another sample made. And that's because at some point something is going to change, because silk doesn't have as much stretch. And then depending on the type of denim you get, whether it is a cotton spandex denim or if it's just 100% cotton, it's going to have little to no stretch. So yes, you can use the same pattern, but you're going to have to at least make a mock-up of that sample in a denim or a silk-like fabric, so that you can see where the alterations need to be made to that pattern. So you could copy that pattern over and then say, hey, this is the denim version, this is the silk version. So now that style gets a new style number. Each design has a different style number. Now, regardless of whether you're going to have a sample in denim, have a sample in leather, or a sample in silk, all of the style numbers can be the same at the beginning, but the last 2 or 3 digits should be different because the fabrication itself is different. And that's a good way to think about to organize your samples as well. So when we come back, we're going to take a few questions and we'll discuss any questions you guys have on like the sample process.
Rise, entrepreneur. Take that first step towards freedom. So long to the old routine. Welcome to your new venture. There's an industry that needs disrupting. Ideas you should be challenging. It takes courage to do what you love. We'll help you begin your journey. As a business like you, dedicated to you, we can take on tomorrow together with a business account you could open today. Entrepreneurs across the UK. Start your business with Tide.
All right. So what questions? All right. So what questions do you have? Do you use fit models? I try to use models that represent my garments, but it is expensive. I do use fit models. I only use fit models. I will never fit a garment on a dress form because a dress form is not ideal for a real body type. Now, when it comes to a fit model, the fit model should not just represent your brand aesthetically, but should represent the brand's cut and the fit of the brand. So let's say your ideal customer is tall or petite. You would need to use a woman that's over 5'7" as your fit model. But if you use yourself as your fit model, and let's say you're like 5'3" and you're making pants or jumpsuits, that's going to be very, very hard for you to transition. So the fit model must match the height and the body type. And I went over body types a couple episodes ago. Is it an hourglass? Is it a reverse triangle? Fit needs to be consistent throughout your entire brand foundation. Can you recommend a hanging tag production company for my custom tags? You can try hang tag production. I like, who do we use for labels and tags? Seal Thread is a good one. I also recommend, one is at the tip of my tongue. Dutch Labels. I could not remember it. Dutch Label & Co. Well, Dutch Labels, they're really, really good as well. And then Woven Labels is a good one too. So you could try that. When do you grade a pattern? I do prior to each garment going into production. I grade a pattern after I've tested my market to make sure that the sizing is going to make sense. So I may have originally decided that I wanted to offer small to 2X, and I see that the only people that's buying the garment or interested in the garment is small to medium large. So I then will grade my garments and then grade my patterns and then go into production after that. So I test the market before I go into production, but I don't make a sample and go directly into production. Do you work multiple fit samples for a client's garments? If they want to, yeah. We ideally we will not go into a second fitting unless the first fitting was really, really off, and then we need to do it again. So like when we work with like plus size clients, we typically would do 2 to 3 fittings just because the body type is hard to sometimes capture it and make sure that it's being showcased in a very much so flattering way. And then of course we do a couple when it comes to swimwear and lingerie because it's very particular in like the boob areas and stuff like that. So only certain type of garments require multiple fittings. Do you take apart a client sample to recreate? I do not want to ruin a pair of pants. No, I do not. And typically clients don't have samples. What you would do is you would lay it down. I have a couple episodes about speccing. You would just be measuring that piece of garment, but you should be taking it apart though. So you measure the waist on it, you measure the hip, you measure the inseam, but you shouldn't be taking the pant apart to make it. That's not required. What fabric do you use to make a swimsuit sample? It depends on the swimsuit. There are some swimsuits that are made out of mesh. There are some swimsuits that are made out of spandex. There are some that are made out of lycra, neoprene. It depends on the fabrication that's going to be in. So I'm going to make a fit sample based off of the fabrication of the swimsuit. Patience. What is your biggest tip for a designer to understand about creating a garment? Yeah, patience. You kind of answered your own question there. I would say problem solving. The biggest tip is having a solution-oriented mindset. If you are solution-oriented and not flabbergasted, or in a rut, because sometimes when you're sewing, it could get like that. Never sew when you're tired. I don't think that that's a good idea. Come back to it. And I also don't think that you should always cut and sew in the same day, especially if you have a lot. Like I'd have one day where I'm just doing pattern making, one day with just cutting, one day with just sewing. Because if you're trying to do pattern making, cutting, and sewing and finishes all in one day, you tend to burn yourself out. So I do recommend to split the days up and don't do all everything at once. Thanks for letting me know that my stuff was out. Do we have any more questions about samples? I am a great designer, but I do not sew. Do you take sketches, flats, and create garments for someone like me? That's exactly what we do. That's all we do. So we have two different sectors here. So we have services and then we have students. So half the bulk of our business, which is about 80% of our business, are for people who are not sewers. We make all of the patterns for them. We do all the sketching for you. Even if you are a sketcher, we still do your sketches over because we have a process that we follow with our flats and our call outs. Then we do the fabric sourcing for you. We show you all of the different options. You choose from there. We start the pattern making. You do a fitting with us. So our entire process. And if you follow us on Instagram, you can see how our process works. And of course, if you go check out our website, we have a 6-step process. So sketches, sourcing, pattern making, fit samples, revisions, and then final sample. And then we also help with production as well. All right. So we can bring your dreams to life, as it says at the bottom of the screen. And then we can also teach you to do it yourself. So, and teach you how to manage that process. When I say teach you to do it yourself, not teach you how to sew or pattern make, but how to work with vendors. And that's why we have the Garment District Tour. The Garment District Tour actually comes with a manual. So it teaches you how to do this yourself. So let's say you didn't want to work with us and you wanted to work with other people. We give you a framework to show you like how to go about, working with the pattern maker, how to work with the factory, how to go about doing your fitting. So we have a lot of options here. So definitely check it out. All right. So if there are not any more questions, I look forward to seeing you guys next week at our next episode. We'll be going over visual merchandising. And I really wanted to hit in on visual merchandising because we are in the world of the pop-up era. And then also like pop-up shops and pop-up stores and trunk shows and trade shows and expos. And the way you're going to want to get people into your space is by your visual merchandising and how you're able to set a scene in maybe a 4-foot space of who you are as a brand and as a designer. So visual merchandising is not just for street windows and inside of stores, but also for yourself in order to invite people into your space in a small setting or for a small period of time. So have an amazing weekend, guys, and I'll see you next week. Peace out.
There's a couple things